Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I talk about my pending trip to Costa Rica, which I will be well into. We talk to Jason Old about Nicaragua, doing what you love, and the history of surfing. And finally, here are some fun surfing facts for you. Surfing is one of the oldest sports in the world, with cave paintings depicting people surfing over 5,000 years ago. In 1959, Linda Benson became the first woman to surf the infamous Waimea Bay at the ripe old age of 15. But last but not least, the world record for the longest surf ride is 3 hours and 55 minutes. Nic's not even sure he can stand that long.
I really don't think I can.
Hit that music.
The South Carolina chapter of NAEP is pleased to announce their next Lunch and Learn on Friday, January 26th. Riverkeeper Bill Stangler will be speaking about their mission to protect and improve water quality, wildlife habitat, and recreation on the Broad, Lower Saluda, and Congaree rivers through advocacy, education, and enforcement of environmental laws, as well as some of their current programs. They are offering an in-person and virtual option for this event. Attendees must register for the in-person by January 19th. But please visit their website at www.naep-sc.org to register.
Okay, now it's time to fill our sponsor spot. If you would like to fill the sponsor spot with your company instead of Nic's shenanigans, please check us out at environmentalprofessionalsradio.com. Don't forget that professionals part. And ready, Nic, go.
Okay, Laura, oftentimes when we don't want people to touch us, we say we have sunburn, right? We always say we have sunburn. Oh, I have sunburn. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't want you to hug me. I have sunburn. Sunburn. Now, what if you could just also have sunburn, right? So you weren't lying about it, right? Like I know that bothers you. It worries you. You don't want to lie and mislead people. You just don't want them to give you a hug unsolicited, right? So with Sunburn Be Now, we actually have a product that will instantly give you sunburn. And yes, it may look exactly like a tanning bed, and maybe we're sending you in there a little longer than you should, but that's not what it is. I'm telling you right now, it's a different product. It's absolutely unique and new, and there's no way related to actual tanning beds and the long-term effects from those. I'm telling you, Sunburn Be Now, newest product in the market. You're going to love it. Fun for all ages, actually. So there you
go. Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done that.
No, me either. I had a friend whose mom did.
Yeah.
Had
sunburn, don't touch me.
Yeah. Oh. Oh no, I meant tanning bed. But yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I need to show up hands in the comments of people who've lied about having a sunburn so someone wouldn't touch them.
I'm sorry, you guys don't do that? I'm so okay, maybe it's just me. I'm learning about myself here.
It's your segment.
Yeah. But okay. Well, tell me about Costa Rica. Like, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it?
Costa Rica, I am doing it because a few things. One, I already wanted to go somewhere. Jess and I have been doing our annual planning for the book publishing company in Hawaii the last 2 years. And then it was like, okay, well, Hawaii has gone back to being its usual expensive travel. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, we're not doing that. And Costa Rica is easy to get to from Tampa, but it turns out she's not able to come. Then I decided, to change my entire life a few months ago. And I was like, well, I need to go somewhere anyway. The last time I upheaved my entire life, I did my road trip in my RV across the country.
Yeah.
Very empowering, very, find yourself again, spend some time by yourself. So I'm going to Costa Rica to do that again. It's, I have to take care of myself, speak the language, get my own food, figure things out. So I was hoping some people would stop and visit, but nobody seems to be able to. So I'm like, okay, cool. It's my trip. So I'll be working, beaching, resetting.
You'll be working in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
Working?
Yes.
Is this like, can I do like a working on your tan joke? Is that like a...
I will be working on that. I'll be working on my tan. I'll be working on yoga. There's a yoga area in the place I'm staying.
Right. Working on vibes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Working on setting some really good vibes for the rest of the year. Starting it off with a cold was not the way I wanted to start it.
That's funny.
So this will be my do-over.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Start off with sunshine and health. And, Syracuse has been gray for the last 32 days, and it'll be gray for the next 32 days. And
so you might as well go to the opposite.
I'm getting out of here. It is literally the opposite. If you look at the weather, it's like gray, cold, gray, cold, gray, cold, sunny, hot, sunny, hot, sunny, hot.
Wait, what is the temperature in Costa Rica right now? Like, what is
It is between like 74 and 89.
Oh my gosh. Like right now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
If I'm saying that right.
Yeah, that's incredible. I've actually always wanted to go to Costa Rica.
Oh, you haven't been?
No, I've never been.
Oh, it's the best.
I would love to go. I've been to, you could say, Ecuador and Peru in South America. I've never really been to Central America. So I've barely been to the the Caribbean. I've only been to really Puerto Rico. So I've got more traveling to do on my list. Where do you go in Costa Rica?
It is amazing. The countries that it's between, I don't know about Panama, but Nicaragua is much poorer and the land has been much more abused. But in Costa Rica, they have such a great culture and lifestyle and education, and there's wildlife everywhere. So that's my big draw, is just like millions of birds. You hear monkeys in the mornings, evenings. Actually, you hear monkeys all the time.
Yeah.
And then there's the beaches, of course. And then there's mountains. Like you can go, you get all the climate, all the different habitat in a short area. And volcanoes, like it's hummingbirds, frogs, like it's so amazing. And I go to the West Coast typically. It's a few hours west of San Jose when you get in. I did contemplate there was another beach on the East Coast that I was going to go to. The property owners were super cool, but I just was drawn back to the West Coast. I like sunsets. I don't see a lot of sunrises, so I prefer to be on the West Coast.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. I'm the same. Like it's like sunrise is at 6 a.m. No, I'm out. I am out. I'm not doing that. I am not interested in that. So I totally agree. If I had to choose, that's what I would do too. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, you'll have to send photos. You'll have to. I mean, do you surf? Are you a surf person?
I have tried surfing. I'm not good at it. I have zero upper body strength, and I just get beaten up. And then I'm afraid I'm drowning in 4 inches of water, and it's terrifying. So.
Yeah.
So I prefer not to, but I like watching people surf. I have a lot of friends who surf. Same. We've had recent guests who surf, and I think it's super cool, but it's not for me.
Right. Yeah. And I'm kind of the same boat. Pun intended, I guess. Yeah, it's hard. It's so much upper body strength. Like it's the funniest thing in the world. Like it's like I can do a pull up, but I can't do surfing for an hour,
I'm laughing right now because like this conversation is full circle because our guest is the surfing historian.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
I was like, wait, we're recording this for this episode. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, great. That's cool.
So Jason, huge surfer, big part of his lifestyle. I wish I could do the same, but I will have a different trip than he would be having if he was there.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, I can totally see it. It's a very fun activity. Very, very cool. I've only ever done it in Hawaii, which was gorgeous and beautiful and wonderful. And then I was terrible at it. I got up for half a second, which apparently counts. I can say that officially. They told me. But yeah, every time I stop, would take a moment to breathe and relax. And it's beautiful to just sit on the board out there. Then, the Jaws thing would come up.
Yeah.
It's just always there. You're like, I can't see the bottom.
Yeah, it's unavoidable.
Wait, what's down there?
Also speaks Spanish fluently, which I'm so jealous of.
Oh,
so
me too.
I will be practicing my Spanish down there for sure.
Yeah. I don't think I've told you this story, but when I was in Ecuador, I did okay, right? I have enough rudimentary Spanish to kind of get through most basic interactions. But we're at a restaurant and the guy is, I'll go, con gas, sin gas. And I'm like, sin gas. I want water with no bubbles in it. And he's like, okay, yellow? And I'm like, no, yellow water? Yellow? No. Yellow? Yellow. And so we're going back and forth. And finally someone else goes, he's asking if you want ice.
I know. He's like, ice, you ding dong.
Oh, yellow. Okay. Yeah. So he was saying it sounded just like the word yellow. Yeah. And in my mind, I knew yellow was ice, but I couldn't get it. I was like, no, I don't want yellow water. I was like, why is he switching to English? I don't understand. My brain couldn't get there. I really wanted it to. But, so remember that. Yellow is ice. Agua sin gas, no yellow. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's all I need to know.
That's all you need to know. Yeah. All right, perfect. Well, why don't we get to the interview then?
Yeah, let's do it. Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Dr. Jason Old, Associate Professor, Historian, and host of the Surfing Historian podcast on the show. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Laura, thank you so much. It's awesome to be here. And stoked to chat a little bit about my research and just hang out with you guys for a bit.
Yeah, I love it. We'll just have a nice chill time talking about history and surfing and all things in between. But if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about your background and what spurred your interest in Latin American history and surfing.
Oh, wow. That's probably the whole podcast in and of itself.
Right.
if you want all that. I've always surfed. I'm going to give you like the brief version. I've always surfed, and, I really started traveling to surf as a teenager to places like Central America. And then I went down to South America. I lived in, did a study abroad in Peru and lived there and surfed. So surfing's just really been a part of my life since I was, a little kid. I was actually, just back home with my family and stumbled across some old photos. And I'm like, man, I really have been surfing and obsessing about surfing forever. So as I got a little bit older, I realized that, I need to find a way to be able to travel and surf and do all the things I love, but also, essentially pursue a career. I thought being a university professor would afford me the free time, but a little bit of the disposable income to get to go do all the things that I enjoy doing. Because, I find that a lot of my friends, they have a whole bunch of disposable income, but very little free time. And then others with all sorts of free time, but, they find it challenging to, kind of get out and about. And so I thought for me, that would be something that would, that was the most, feasible or viable option to let me do the things I love. And I love teaching too. So it, it really worked out. But as I got, a little older and I got into the university, teaching and doing all that, I, pursued my Ph.D. I've always been interested in Latin America because I've traveled there for so long. I've lived there, and it just feels like a part of me. And so as I was coming towards doing my dissertation, I was actually looking to do work on the revolutions, Cuba and Nicaragua, but there's just so much written about that with a PhD dissertation, you need to find something that you can add to the conversation, so to speak. And it was really my chair, one of my committee chairs for the PhD, that she's also a bit of a sports historian. And she knew that I lived in Nicaragua, worked as a surf guide. And, I wanted to write about, sort of that part of Latin America. And she kind of floated the idea. She's like, why don't you write about surfing in Nicaragua? And I was kind of shocked. I was like, hold on, really? Like, I get to write about a place I love, a sport I love, and I end up with finish my PhD. But, it wasn't as simple as like some bro dude surf story. It was very rigorous, and it was extremely challenging. I have to admit that it was all well worth it, and it's something that, quite frankly, I'm very proud of, and I get to go around the world and talk about my research and talk about the impacts of surfing in Nicaragua, the positives, the negatives. So that's sort of, I managed to leverage this sport I love and write about it for my PhD. So now here we are, and I get to talk, on podcast about it. So I'm super grateful, super stoked.
That's amazing. I love anything that involves people living their best life, but then also incorporate it into their career is like amazing. But, some people listening may be wondering, okay, but why are you here on the environmental podcast? But as we were talking about before, surfers spend so much time in the water, and we've had other guests who are environmental scientists or researchers or whatever, and they surf because it is a part of nature. And there's a linkage between spending that much time in the ocean and then wanting to protect the planet that is tied to it, right? So can you speak a little bit to like what you've learned about environment and how like the whole thing has changed the way you perceive things and the conversations you have with others?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, that you and I have talked before we were recording about bringing on some, and, surfers who were also, let's say, environmentalists. And that, as I told you, that's no surprise to me. I won't say all surfers, but a large percentage of surfers, I put myself in this group, we consider ourselves to be stewards of that environment, that surf, we'll call it the surf ecosystem. And, while I write about history in surfing, many of my colleagues write about climate change and sea level rise and all these different things as environmental scientists, and they surf. My buddy Ed Atkin in New Zealand, my buddy Dan Reineman and over in on the West Coast in California, scholars, researchers, avid surfers, and also sort of from a scholarly point of view, looking at the impacts we're having on the environment, but also looking at how we as surfers, and I'm kind of using their words, like can be stewards of the environment, better stewards of the environment, or how surfers and these generations of surfers, say granddad, dad, mom, whoever, grandma, have seen changes to the coastline and how they really are, maybe not in the academic sense, experts, quote unquote, but really have seen change and can be resources for understanding how things are changing. But as far as me, why am I on as a historian? Not to talk about them, of course, but I rely heavily on their expertise for sure when we talk about the environment. But my research sort of overlaps some of the work they're doing, but also work that geologists and others are doing, particularly in Nicaragua. I'm thinking about scholars like Matthew Taylor, Thomas Lavanchi, Sarah Romano, that are sort of looking at environment, looking at water insecurity in Tola, Nicaragua specifically, which is where I do my research, and looking at how the impacts of surf tourism or tourism more broadly on water insecurity. So I draw from their expertise as well in my research. But yeah, all of that to sort of say, surf tourism, for all the positives, can also, if you go into these rural coastal communities that don't necessarily have the infrastructure to handle, that massive growth, it can have an impact on the local community. Wells can dry up, they can become salty. And so while I do consider myself to be more of a cultural historian, and I write on economics and politics too, as it relates to surf tourism, it's impossible to ignore the environmental impacts that tourism can have in some of these rural coastal communities.
Yeah. Well, and Nicaragua is so interesting. So one of my very good friends, Martha Gruber, who's an environmental scientist from Tampa, now living in North Carolina, her father still lives in Nicaragua, and I have visited there with her and her family. Absolutely love it. It's an amazing country, amazing people, lots of, at least where I was, coffee growing. And of course, it has a very interesting political history. So give us the rundown on how'd you end up in Nicaragua? There's a lot of other Latin American countries you could end up in, but what was the draw there for you? And then, what do you focus on now? How does your research continue? You've already done a dissertation. What does that look like as a career?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to answer your question on I'll give you a brief history of Nicaragua because that's tied into my dissertation research. But I guess to answer your question about what got me interested in Nicaragua, my buddy was looking for translators. This was back in 2004. And again, very long story short with that, I was like, yeah, I'll come join, and I worked as a translator because I speak English and Spanish. And I ended up getting connected to a buddy who's now a really good buddy of mine. And he happened to own a surf camp, which was actually the first all-inclusive surf camp in Nicaragua, which opened in 1999, Popoyo Surf Lodge. And we kind of connected. He's like, hey, man, do you want to live here and work as a surf guide? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, what is the catch, right? You're going to literally pay me to surf and eat really good food. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so, there's a lot more of the story, and so that really, I give them a lot of credit, for that invite, so to speak. And that experience I had me hooked. I thought Nicaragua was incredible. I'd been all around Latin America at that point, and there was just something special about that place. And I eventually went on to buy a piece of property. I have a botanical gardens there. And
so cool.
But as far as the brief history, my research starts technically in the 1930s. You had from a roughly 1912 to the early 1930s, you had a U.S. Marine occupation. It was roughly 21 years. And, sort of towards the end of that, you had the Sandino Rebellion, which is actually where the Sandinistas take their name from, later on down the road. And that was from roughly 1927 to 1933. And that was a resistance against the U.S. occupation. And so moving into sort of the early to mid 30s, you have the good neighbor policy. And essentially what that led to was the United States bolstering what eventually evolved into a family dictatorship, the Somoza family. And so you have from about roughly, we'll say mid 1930s to 1979, because in July of 1979, you have the Sandinista revolution that deposed this long-standing US-backed dictatorship. And so from about 1979 to 1990, you have the revolutionary government attempting to build their revolutionary nation building project. But that was against, for many of the listeners, they know the 80s in Nicaragua. And that was against the backdrop of the Contra War funded by the Ronald Reagan administration in the United States. And so eventually that led to 1990, Nicaragua essentially agreed to free elections, and the United States candidate, who was very sympathetic to neoliberalism, the Washington Consensus, and much of the sort of sweeping privatizations that was part and parcel of sort of the Reagan-Thatcher era. And of course, it comes before that too. But so in 1990, with, of course, Reagan was done by then. It was H.W. Bush. But Violeta Chamorro wins in Nicaragua, and she really almost immediately makes moves to open Nicaragua up to foreign direct investment, tourism, and passes a whole host of not a whole host, but a number of some legislation that was intended to spur on this foreign investment, the purchase of private property and other things. And that's really where surfers, sort of in the wake of all that, start to gravitate to this area, because it was, in their view, a new frontier. Costa Rica was starting to get pretty crowded, particularly after the Endless Summer 2 movie in 1994, I believe, which exposed a lot of the lesser known breaks. And so Costa Rica became extremely, in the view of many of the surfers, overcrowded. And Nicaragua became this sort of new frontier for what I myself and a number of other scholars refer to as surf settler colonialism. And so that really, but those policies starting in 1990 were very much the catalyst for what was to come. And all of Chamorro's predecessors sort of built on a lot of those early legislation and sort of broadened it to lure in or entice foreigners to invest in this new, let's say, conflict-free Nicaragua. And so, back to what I said just a minute ago, 1999 marks very much a watershed moment in Nicaragua's surfing history with the start of the Popoyo Surf Lodge in 1999 in Playa Huasacate, Tola, which is southwestern Nicaragua. And so I say the rest is history, but I think we're going to talk more about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how often are you there? You've got property. You go there quite often?
Yeah. So I came back, I did my research and, came back to the States, finished my dissertation, graduated with my PhD and all that. And I guess kind of going back to your question, what's the future hold, so to speak? As an academic, we want to continue publishing. We want to stay relevant. And this past June, I think June 5th is when it came out, 2023. I published another article in the International Journal of the History of Sport, which I titled Empire at Play. And it looks at the United States cultural impacts on Nicaragua's national sports. And so U.S. sort of say that, my argument is that American imperialism is responsible for Nicaragua's three most popular sports, surfing being the latest of them, but boxing, baseball, which were a byproduct of the occupation in the early 1900s, and then surfing as a result of everything I just explained a second ago. And so the United States culturally has had a major impact on these three sports in terms of introducing them. Nicaraguans have taken it upon themselves to excel in them. and are phenomenal surfers, incredible baseball players, incredible boxers. And so they've ultimately evolved into national sports. And so, but to your point, I try to go back as often as possible. I've been going to El Salvador a lot lately. I used to go there in the 90s as well, but I've been sort of revisiting El Salvador because I hadn't been there in a while, wanted to spend some time there surfing. And I'm also working on an article, sort of tinkering with it, you might say, that I'm calling it The Tale of Two Surf Cities, and sort of looking at the rise of El Salvador as a La Libertad specifically as a surf city. That's what they've called it. And then Nicaragua, Tola in Nicaragua, where my research is focused, as a surf municipality. So the different conditions that engendered the rise of surf tourism in those two countries in the wake of the conflicts of the 80s.
That's awesome. So you must like writing too.
You learn to like it, that's for sure. It's like art, I kind of obsess over it too much. It's like partly an art, partly a dance, partly like riding a wave, like when I don't know about my dissertation, but like, some of the shorter articles, it's like, I want to take you on a trip, right? And it's like dropping into a wave and riding it and pulling some maneuvers. And so, I'm always getting better. I wouldn't, even with a PhD, I wouldn't, say I'm the best writer in the world. I'm always trying to get better. And the only way to get better is to do it.
Right. And you also writing a children's book or a written one?
Yeah. It just came out December 1st, actually. So,
oh, that's awesome. What's it called?
I called it Noob Squad. And then the subtitle is A Big Brother's Guide to Surfing Etiquette. And so it was very much non-academic, super fun, working with an illustrator, working with my cousin as well, who was kind of with me all along, like brainstorming the ideas. And I really just honestly wanted to write something that didn't exist, in the sense that, so we have surfing etiquette, like, adults. You can go to different websites, some from California and elsewhere, and, surfing etiquette, right? Like, don't drop in on people, don't snake people, observe the right of way, sort of the rules of surfing, if you will. But nothing like that existed for, little kiddos. And
yeah,
I just wanted to do something fun and artsy. And really, that's kind of what spurred on the book. And it turned out really well. I made the joke the other day. I'm like, more people have read that book in 2 weeks than have read my dissertation in an entire year. So maybe I should have been in writing illustrated children's books instead. But they're both fun. And as you mentioned, talking about, as my Instagram is Surfing Historian, my website, surfinghistorian.com. Like, I am an academic, I have my PhD. I love doing all that, but I just love creating around surfing. And so it was dedicated to my two little nephews too. So that was also awesome. The motivation.
That's very cool. So have they been surfing with you?
No, they're too young. They're too little.
Okay.
Which is, I think the book was like subtly for my brother, like, hey man, like, read this to them, get them stoked. And then, because they live near the Outer Banks of North Carolina and the waves are great there. And so it's like, that was probably my subtle hint to get them super stoked on surfing. But when the time comes and, I'm there, yes, I'm going to have them in the water and, I'm going to, I would love to teach them how to surf.
I'm sure they're going to be like, Uncle Jason.
Yeah, I know. It's cool. I do like being an uncle, by the way. So yeah, I dedicated the book to them, and I think they were the older one. I think he'll be 5 in end of June, early July, and so he's old enough to see his name and know it's his name. He's like, that's my name. So that was cool. I honestly did it for them. I just wanted to sort of give them something as really essentially as a Christmas gift. And the fact that so many other people have bought it and are super stoked on it is mind blowing. And, for all those of you who are listening and you do buy this book, you got to get super stoked and super animated when you read it to your kids. Cause I've put little sections where you can you're like, you, and make cool sounds and all that. So be sure to get super, super animated for your kids.
I love that. That's a really cool idea. I had another friend who was reading books to their kid, and I was like, okay, so what voices are you using? But I love having a book with some cues in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, we did a voiceover animation. I don't know if I would have picked those voices, but they're still fun. So, you can check that out as well. That's totally free.
That's super cool. All right, your podcast. Let's talk about that. The Surfing Historian. How long have you been doing that? And what kind of stuff do you talk about?
That's a good question. So I started it, I think, 2021 before I moved down to Nicaragua to do my research. And then I, was doing it from Nicaragua. Some of the later episodes are, from down in Nicaragua. So if it skips or something, or it doesn't sound great, it's probably, I was on that Nicaraguan Wi-Fi. So, but no, I think I started in 2021. Really, it was, to be honest, I was motivated by, the world knows, I don't have to remind them of 2020 with COVID, when everything sort of shut down and a lot of my friends weren't able to come to the classroom, because I like to bring a lot of my colleagues in to speak to my history students just about their area of expertise, because I don't know everything about everything. I know a lot about a few things, and my friends do as well. And so I like to bring them in. But that's really what started it. It was intended to be a resource for my students. And, after sort of bringing my friends on Zoom and realizing that, okay, well, we're having these really awesome conversations. Now I just need someone to fancy it up, put an intro and outro on it and, kind of fancy it up, probably edit out most of my ums. Then we have a podcast. And so I was trying to figure out a name, and then the Surfing Historian just stuck. I was like, well, I am a historian. I am a surfer. So, and my students kind of voted on it, and I think that was their favorite. So we went with it. And it started out more history, right? So if anybody who's listening wants to go check out the podcast, you'll notice that, for example, the first episode is with my buddy Aaron, and we don't really talk much about surfing. We talk about memory and, Southern memory in particular, the U.S. South. So many of the first episodes aren't surf centered. They're more, sort of history and summer environment, actually. But as I got sort of my feet under me and, I started to get a little bit better and reach out to friends from like the Global Wave Conference and all that, it started to come into its own, let's say. It started to become sort of the Surfing Historian podcast, where it was about surfing. I would bring on some historians, some environmental scientists, economists, and it sort of centered around surfing. And really season 2 is that. Like, it's all of the guests I bring on are, whether it's in psychology or philosophy or economics or whatever it may be, we're all talking about their scholarship, which is centered around surfing. And so I have a blast with it. One of my friends was joking about it the other day. It's like, dude, you basically just bring on your friends and talk about like what they've written about, what they've published, what they're working on. And it's become a very, very, at least for me, a very valuable resource for my students, because I sort of pair certain readings in my history class with an episode. I'm, again, very, very humbled and shocked at the listeners from around the world, because I can see the heat map and I'm like, yeah, wow, there's people all over the world listening to this. And people reach out to me and they ask me questions. And yeah, it's gone beyond anything I would have expected. And now, kind of maybe because of that, I'm on here with you. So I'm super grateful for that as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think, having a podcast with any sort of like regular publishing it's a lot of work, but it's so worth it. And having these conversations with people, you never know what you're going to end up talking about. Sometimes, we have questions in a script that we end up talking about completely different things.
Yeah. Yes. I try to stay on script when I'm hosting, but I think that's why I give, the guests there. I'm like, dude, you're going to be doing most of the talking. Otherwise I'll be like digressing left and right. So. Right.
Yeah. And then I meet people who are in places when I travel. I can go and meet them and see them. And, it's so great. So congrats on that. Congrats on all the stuff you're putting out there and doing. But let's jump into, we have a section on our podcast called Field Notes, where we talk about our memorable moments from doing work in the field. since yours is surf related, I imagine you have one or two memorable experiences while surfing or teaching.
Oh, wow. I mean, I think actually, well, Christmas just passed, but, a memorable moment when I was there living, doing research was actually on Christmas Day. I say, research in quotes, right? I wasn't doing research necessarily that day. I was, surf was absolutely insane. And it was just me and a few buddies out on Christmas Day. And, it's those moments that I miss a lot, just living there, waking up, going to surf. But, the other thing, a little bit more related to say, we'll call them field notes, to kind of fall in line with this section. Honestly, like I've been going back and forth there since 2004. I lived there. I've watched all these, young kids get their first board and flounder and get hammered by the waves. And now, they're certainly surfing better than I am, but surfing better than most everyone in the water for the most part. And so writing about that, I think that's a story that emerged as I was writing this. So this sport that was introduced by foreigners, Americans among others, and or affluent Nicaraguans, because many of them had started surfing because they kind of had that connection and they could buy a surfboard. But seeing how the sport evolved into a national sport and really putting these kids, these, underprivileged kids from these coastal communities front and center, right? They're hosting a lot of events there, like international events, but more importantly, a lot of these kids are going out onto the international stage and competing and doing well. And so I think that was a beautiful story that, I didn't see coming, and it emerged. And that's really when I go around to like the Global Wave Conference and things, that's the story I like to highlight, because, we could certainly go into the many of the negative impacts of surf tourism. We could spend a whole episode on that. And I'm, certainly happy to do so. But, one of the things, like I said, that just emerged as I was doing this research was that these young kids who took hold of this sport and are now excelling in it. I don't know. I just found that one to be pretty interesting, pretty cool. Another one, as far as like field notes and recording, just sitting with some of the elders, because where I do my research, the sort of the community behind the waves, let's call it, is one of the communities is called Las Salinas de Nahualapa. So there's a strong indigenous history there. The Nahua, so the Nahuatl speaking Aztecs, which are central Mexico, but there was sort of a migration down to this part of Nicaragua. And again, that's for a different podcast. But sitting with these elders from these, sort of traditionally indigenous communities and giving them voice, hearing how this community has changed because of that, for good and for bad. Many of the elders see even the boys out surfing as wasting their time. They should be doing other things. And so giving them a voice, hearing from them, some of them who are, very much elders and have seen, they lived through the Somoza era, they lived through the revolution and the Contra War, and they've lived through the sort of, let's say, the introduction of surf tourism and a radical change in their economy, in their local economy. So just kind of hearing the way they remember everything to be was also fascinating. I feel like I say this a lot. I don't think I would have gained access to these communities had I not, one, been able to speak Spanish, and two, had they trust me. I don't have ill intentions. I literally want to just write a local history of this area, and many of them are my friends. And so the younger generation, but like their grandparents, if their grandson says, hey, Granddad Jason wants to interview you and hear you talk about what life used to be like, they're stoked. Yeah. Now, I kept them anonymous just because, out of respect. Sure. But those stories and those field notes alone, which I recorded them as oral histories, that's what we do, are awesome. I'm sure someday I'll go back and listen to them again. But that really, just those stories helped color this dissertation and really bring it to life in a way that it wouldn't have otherwise. And so I hope I answered your question with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think like you said, being able to speak the language, huge. How long have you been speaking Spanish? And did you learn it there, or did you learn it in school and then you were like, okay, good thing I have this?
So when I was an undergrad, my girlfriend at the time was from El Salvador. And so many of my friends have heard this story. She hears this story all the time because I'm still very much friends with her family. That's one of my connections to Central America. And so we met in college and her mom didn't speak English. And so, I had been learning French at the time. But I was like, you know what, I'll take Spanish. I thought I had to take it for college credit. Like I thought I needed the language requirements. I was like, well, why not just take Spanish so I can speak to her mom? And so that's really what started. So this is back when email first came around. So now I'm dating myself, but we're talking mid to late 90s. And right. When I would learn something new, I would like be super stoked to like email her. And so, yeah, so I had a motivation for learning the language. And then I went to El Salvador to surf for the first time in 1997, sort of 5 years after the peace accords, which were in 1992. And so that really was the catalyst. And from that, there was no turning back after that. I was like, this part of the world is incredible. It's warm. The water's warm. The waves are good. The food is good. I'm glad I found out that it existed back then. So, because there was no turning back. And then I went and lived in Peru. I ended up getting a bachelor's in Spanish, I guess, to answer your question. So it sort of folded into the bachelor's. I went on to do my master's, my grad work. Part was in Spanish Lit. The other part was in Latin American and Caribbean studies. So I learned to speak the language, but I also learned it formally as well, like grammatically. But living all throughout Latin America, I was able to sort of become fluent. I wasn't just speaking Spanish out of some book, but now I teach it. So, and it's really awesome. I teach history, I teach Spanish. So it's really cool to be able to be in the classroom with English speakers and help them learn this language and say, guys, I know how hard this is. Trust me. You see me standing here fluent, but trust me, I sat right where you sat. I had the same struggles. I know what your struggles are every semester. And so, because I went through it, and I give them stories of me just not being able to grasp certain concepts and struggling in the language. But, just having that motivation, having the discipline, the consistency is, brought me to where I am today. And like you just said a minute ago, if I didn't know Spanish, this dissertation wouldn't be what it is, because and I try to sort of encourage my students that want to go on and do this sort of work and say, you need to know another language. And so, I could, again, go on and on and on about the benefits and how it's personally benefited me, and not just in the academic sense and all those senses, but just hanging out in the water, surfing, chatting with locals who have become my very good friends all around the Spanish speaking world. So speaking someone else's language well is a really good way to their heart. And
I love that.
And so it shows them also like, hey, you mean something. I value you. I respect you so much that I've gone as far as to learn your language to speak to you in a language that you feel, right? Because, a lot of times if you just know words from another language, you don't feel it the same way you feel your native language. And so, I feel very fortunate to just have the opportunity to travel and do all these things too.
Yeah, that's super cool. I feel very inspired. I'm heading to I'll be in Costa Rica by the time this comes out. And I've been to several Spanish speaking countries, and my Spanish is pretty good to get around, nowhere near fluent. Always trip up on the tenses and conjugation, and I've always had intentions of doing it. But this time I'll be there for 3 weeks, so I will be forced to at least try a little harder.
Yeah. It's like the same as I tell my students, like, you got to be there, right? Like, and you're doing all the right things to do it. Like, if you're in the environment and you're speaking, and it just takes time, like surfing, like anything, you don't get good at it overnight.
Right. So any dream surf spots you haven't been to yet?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I mean, I have been so fortunate. I've gone to virtually every surf spot I have ever wanted to go to. But I would say one that I've been interested in going to, Senegal. Just, I don't know if I'd call it a dream spot, but I don't know. It could become a dream spot because I've never been there. Senegal is a place I'd like to go to. Mozambique would be another place I'd like to go to. I'm not the biggest fan of cold water, to be completely honest with you and all the listeners. And so I tend to stay in the more warmer areas. Yeah, I've been very fortunate to surf places that I grew up looking at in the surf mags, like G-Land and Uluwatu and Bali and Morocco, Peru, all the, of course, Central America, Barbados, all these different places. Like I just feel Portugal. I was just in Portugal. And so I'm so grateful that I've been able to do that. But yeah, I would say Senegal's probably there. Mozambique. I would like to explore Africa a bit more. The Mentawais or Mentawi, some people call it that. But places like that, the Maldives or Maldives, however, people like to pronounce those. Places like that. It's over there towards, say, like the Indo area, right? And anywhere there, maybe Fiji. But I don't know. I guess now I'm just kind of rattling.
I know it's gonna be a long story.
I'll go to any one of those, to be honest with you. But I just sort of leveraged this surfing historian thing and just gone with it. And, it's panning out. And so, I tell my students a lot of times, like, try to do what you love, right? Just give it a shot. Worst case, you fail, and then you can go do the job you didn't want to go do,
Right.
And so, but at least give it a try. And that's really been, we've talked a lot about some of the things I've been doing, the podcast, the book, the Ph.D., the surf traveling stuff. The way I see it is we have one life, and why not just go for it? And that's really all I've been doing. I don't consider myself to be, unique per se. I've just kind of been willing to fail, I guess I don't know if we want to end on that, but
no, I think
just
that's
willing
great.
willing to give it a shot, and see what happens. And I know the PhD was a lot of work, as you very well know with this podcast. It's a whole lot of work. I commend you for this because I know how hard it is. And but yeah, it's just I just kind of, even with the kids' book, I just like being creative. I like creating things. And I know you haven't read the book yet. Hopefully the listeners will check it out. But I want to sort of bring this back to the sort of environmental piece of your podcast. At the very end of that book, right? It's a story about surf etiquette and these brothers and sisters, big brothers, teaching them how to not get hurt out in the waves. But at the very end, they're all walking up from surfing, and there's trash on the beach, and the female character, Cindy Basil, picks up the trash and puts it in the trash bin. And so really kind of at the heart of who I am too, to sort of tie this all together, is it's not just about surfing. It's also about, sort of back to what you said at the beginning, being a steward of our environment, being a steward of this beautiful planet, and trying to leave it a little better, than the way I found it. And I know I probably speak for many surfers, because a lot of them think that way too. Yeah. And my buddy Dan Reineman, who I mentioned earlier, one of the things he said in one of our podcast episodes was he wants to see his kids and his kids, his grandkids and great grandkids be able to enjoy the waves and the ocean and the beaches in the same way that he and I have, and many of us have. And so I want to drop that little nugget in the kids' book to sort of plant that seed with them too, and say, hey, like, let's not take this for granted. Let's not destroy these beautiful beaches. Let's do our part to not just surf safely and enjoy our time on the waves, but let's keep these beaches clean too. And so that was really sort of something I wanted to put it right at the very end of that book.
Yeah. I love that. Well, we are running out of time. I have a million more questions for you, but we're running out of time. So is there anything else you want to leave us with before we go?
Oh, I mean, yeah, well, yes, of course. I could talk all afternoon about this stuff, but Laura, I'm just, I just want to thank you, honestly, for reaching out, for bringing me on. I know it's the holidays, and this is going to air after, the new year, but, we're hard at it here, right after Christmas. So thank you for this. Thank you for allowing me to talk about all these things I love and all the things that, I've worked really, really hard for and want to share with the world. So thank you for giving me that platform to do it.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for coming on here. Like you said, it's kind of, we haven't totally talked about just strictly environmental. We're talking about surfing and history, but I think, regardless of what field you're in. And even in particularly, I think in environment, I do environmental career coaching, and a lot of people, what job am I going to get? Well, what job can you create? Like some people, like maybe your future doesn't have to be aligned with what already exists out there. Maybe you create your own path. And so I always enjoy talking to people who've made their own way or done something a little outside the norm. So appreciate to hear all of your stories and the insights that you have for sure.
Yeah, I guess if I can add one small plug, shameless little plug on a project I'm working on right now. We call it the Surf Share. And it's something I started before had to table it when I started my PhD, but we're going to try to revamp it. It's a surfer to surfer, really a platform that allows surfers around the world to connect. So if you're a surf guide, locally in Nicaragua, and I'm traveling to Nicaragua, it's an app designed to connect people around the world, empowering people in local communities who are, they may be great surf instructors, surf guys, but they're not visible. And so we wanted to create this platform to make all these amazing people around these coastal communities visible, and our goal is to provide them with social mobility, leverage surf tourism. And of course, it will have that environmental piece, like always at the heart of who I am is to protect the environment, to, be stewards of this beautiful planet, but also to provide opportunities for people. And we're working on that right now. It will not be out when this airs, but, it's a project. Like I said, I love creating and I love, trying to provide things for people. And so hopefully that will come to fruition in 2024. That's to be determined, but I thought I'd drop that little plug in there. And again, Thank you so much, Laura. I could go on and on and on, but I know we got to cut it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And, you're just seeing a need for something and solving a problem. And that's how businesses are made. So, I think that's, for anyone listening, if you have an idea out there, just give it a shot, find a way to do it. Right. You mentioned some places to find you, but go ahead and repeat where people can get in touch with you. Oh,
yeah. So, really all the resources, I didn't even talk about this actually, but this just surfinghistorian.com. If you haven't had enough of listening to me, there's more about me there. There are all the podcast episodes. We've created a surf library with virtually every surf book published. There's also a nonprofit piece component to it where I have gone through somewhat painstakingly and tried to find every single surf-centered nonprofit around the world and make it searchable. So you can go and do that. Really, it's not surfinghistorian.com is not about me. It's about, again, connecting people and providing people with resources. So you can do surfinghistorian.com. My Instagram is, Surfing Historian. So you can find me there. I'm on LinkedIn, of course. And I'm on all sorts of social medias, but I probably use those the most, to be honest with you. So Awesome. By all means, reach out to me. Would love to connect with all of you who are listening. And again, Laura, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And quick shout out to Ed Curtis, because I know that he's listening and he'll want to hear the surfer talk. And then also Martha Gruber, who I mentioned before, because I think she's also a bull, go Bulls, and is my friend from Nicaragua. So she listens. So I'll say hi to them. And thank you so much, Jason. We'll touch base next time I'm in Tampa.
And that's our show. Thank you, Jason Old, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.
Bye.